Welcome to Metaphysical Soul Speak. I'm your host, Alanna Fox Starks. Hey guys, so I don't know what's going on because I heard a report on YouTube from one of my normal people I listen to, and he said that the Schumann resonance was so high, they registered so high yesterday that it stopped Instagram and Facebook, and magnetic changes were all over the planet. And then when I went to where I get my Schumann resonance information, it pretty much said there was just a couple little things, hardly anything worth mentioning, and kind of a calm day. So I don't know what to make of it. I don't think it was the Schumann resonance that caused the magnetic problems with the internet. I had a lot of problems with my internet here, just in general. Just getting on was a problem. For a while, a couple times it happened, and that's been happening for the past week, actually. Every night, it just suddenly nothing is available. But I did notice a very weird anomaly is that when I get on YouTube and everything seems to be working, every time I try to get on a website that mentions magic or the Ascension or anything metaphysical or anything to do with the positive light worker side of things, it takes 16 to 20 seconds to load. Half the time, if not 75% of the time, it won't load. Oh, but boy, gee golly, if I just try to find a cat video, within half a second that will play. Anything about politics or news plays within 1 second. Pretty interesting, yeah? Anyway, that's something I have noticed. So, as I was going to do a search for something completely unrelated and random tonight, there was this article on Bing that said, huge earthquake shakes or rocks Ecuador. So I go to the article, and it says huge earthquake, but it was only 4.6, which is not huge. So sorry, but 6.8 that I lived through in Northridge, pretty freaking big. I've been through a lot of 4-point-somethings that weren't that big. So anyway, it didn't rock all of Ecuador. The earthquake we had a month ago, the 7.5, rocked this entire country, shook my building, put cracks throughout my apartment walls. And even though it was an hour drive from here, it still affected this whole city, affected the whole country, part of Peru and part of Colombia. The 4.6, I didn't even feel it. It did nothing. But it is interesting to note, an hour later, there was a 4.8 in Guatemala. And then there was, a couple hours after that, a 4.5, I believe, in Argentina. And then there was another earthquake, again in the 4-point-something range, at the point of the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. So as we move forward on this trajectory, we're going to have a lot more earthquakes. Oh, yes, and there was another article. I didn't quite read it yet, but 17 earthquakes yesterday in the supervolcano of Yellowstone. So yeah, we are going to have a lot more earthquakes. Just expect the earth changes to happen and occur. It's normal, natural, I guess, when the third dimensional world is breaking up and we're going up to the fifth dimension. Our DNA is changing and everything. Anyway, that's my Ascension news for the moment. Tonight is the second part of the magic story. I read you the first part last week, and there was the part 1 second half that I forgot to include last week. I am including that now. And this is my original reading of the magic story that I read, in 2012, I believe. So about 6.5 years ago, something like that, I read this. And the story is hundreds of years old, so I mean, it's really relevant to everybody. Anywhere that, well, if you have a human body, is probably going to be relevant to you. So I hope you enjoyed this second half, and next week will be the final conclusion of the magic story. And it is Throwback Thursday, so I thought you guys would enjoy to hear it. I don't know, I'm excited for you guys because I love this story. In fact, I'm going to listen to it again as soon as I publish this. I'm going to go listen to it again. I love this story. I really do. Anyway, I'm going to be back after this message. You're going to hear the old throwback recording, and my website has not been updated, and, kind of disregard when I'm going to be on the air, because that was when this was a radio show and it only aired twice a week. And this is a podcast now, and you can listen to it every single day if you want. And you don't have to go to the archives. You just go to my podcast website on anchor.fm/metaphysical. So here we go, guys. I hope you enjoy this. If it had made so many fortunes, surely it should be capable of making mine. The certainty that the wonderful story, and I began to regard it as magic, it was in the air. It possessed me as I started to walk homeward, fingering the solitary nickel in my pocket and contemplating the certainty of riding downtown in the morning. I experienced the sensation of something stealthily pursuing me, as if fate were treading along behind me, yet never overtaking. And I was conscious that I was possessed with, or by, the story. When I reached Union Square, I examined my address book for the home of Stuyrtevant. It was not recorded there. Then I remembered the cafe in University Place, and although the hour was late, it occurred to me that he might be there. He was, in a far corner of the room, surrounded by a group of acquaintances. I saw him. He discovered me at the same instant and motioned to me to join them at the table. There was no chance for the story, however. There were half a dozen around the table, and I was the furthest removed from Stuyrtevant. But I kept my eyes upon him and bided my time, determined that when he rose to depart, I would go with him. A silence suggestive of respective awe had fallen upon the party when I took my seat. Everyone had been seeming to think, and the attention was all fixed upon Stuyrtevant. The cause was apparent. He had been telling the story. I had entered the cafe just too late to hear it. On my right, when I took my seat, was a doctor. On my left was a lawyer. Facing me on the other side was a novelist with whom I had some acquaintance. The others were artists and newspaper men. "Oh, it's too bad, Mr. Courier," remarked the doctor. "You should have come a little sooner. Stuyrtevant has been telling us a story. It is quite wonderful, really. I say, Stuyrtevant, won't you tell that story again for the benefit of Mr. Courier?" "Why, yes, I believe that Courier has somehow failed to hear the magic story. Although, as a matter of fact, I think he was the first one to whom I ever mentioned it at all. It was here in this cafe, too, at this very table." "Do you remember what a wild night that was, Courier? Wasn't I called to the telephone or something like that? To be sure. I remember now. Interrupted just at the point when I was beginning the story. After that, I told it to 3 or 4 fellows, and it braced them up, as it had me. It seems incredible that a mere story can have such a tonic effect upon the success of so many persons who are engaged in such widely different occupations. That is what it has done.
It is a kind of never-failing remedy like a cough mixture that is warranted to cure everything from a cold in the head to galloping consumption. There was Parsons, for example. He's a broker, you know, and he had been on the wrong side of the market for a month. He utterly had lost his grip and was on the verge of failure. I happened to meet him at the table. He was feeling the bluest, and before we parted, something brought me around to the subject of the story, and I related it to him. It had the same effect on him as it had on me, and has on everybody who has ever heard it, as far as I know. I think you will all agree with me that it's not the story itself that performs the surgical operation on the minds of those who are familiar with it. It is the way that it is told, in print, I mean. The author has somehow produced a psychological effect which is indescribable. The reader is hypnotized. He perceives a mental and a moral tonic. Perhaps, Doctor, you can give some scientific explanation of the influence exerted by the story. It is a sort of elixir manufactured out of words, eh? From that the company entered upon a general discussion of theories. Now and then slight references were made to the story itself, and they were just sufficient to tantalize me, the only one present who had not heard it. At length I left my chair and, passing around the table, seized Stuyrtevant by one arm. I succeeded in drawing him away from the party. If you have any consideration for an old friend who is rapidly being driven mad by the existence of what confounded story which fate seems determined that I shall never ever hear, you will relate it to me now, I said savagely. Stuyrtevant stared at me in wild surprise. All right, he said. The others will excuse me for a few moments, I think. Sit down here and you shall have it. I found and pasted in an old scrapbook that I purchased in Ann Street for 3 cents, and there isn't a thing about it by which one can get any idea in what publication it originally appeared or who wrote it. When I discovered it, I began casually to read it, and in a moment I was interested. Before I left it, I had read it through many times, so that I could repeat it almost word for word. It affected me strangely, as if I had come into contact with some strong personality. There seems to be in the story a personal element that applies to everyone who reads it. Well, after I had read it several times, I began to think it over. I couldn't stay in the house, so I seized my coat and a hat, and I went out. I must have walked several miles buoyantly without realizing I was the same man who only a short time before had been in the depths of despondency. That was the day I met you here, you remember. We were interrupted at that instant by a uniformed messenger who handed Stuyrtevant a telegram. It was from his chief, and demanded his instant attendance at the office. The sender had already been delayed an hour, and there was no help for it. He must go at once. Ah, too bad, said Stuyrtevant, rising and extending his hand to me. Tell you what I'll do, old chap. I'm not likely to be gone any more than an hour or two. You take my key, wait for me in my room. In the escritoire near the window you will find an old scrapbook, bound in rawhide. It was manufactured, I have no doubt, by the author of the magic story. Wait for me in my room until I return. I found the book without difficulty. It was a quaint, homemade affair, covered, as Stuyrtevant had said, with rawhide, and bound with leather thongs. The pages formed an odd combination of yellow paper, vellum, and homemade parchment. I found the story, curiously, printed on the last named material. It was quaint and strange. Evidently, the printer had set it under the supervision of the writer. The phraseology was an unusual combination of 17th and 18th century mannerisms, and the interpolation of italics and capitals could have originated in no other brain than that of its author. In reproducing the following story, the peculiarities of type, etc., are eliminated, but in other respects, it remains unchanged. Welcome back. I am so happy you could join me again this week. Last week, I started to read The Magic Story, Part 1. And that part of the story is about 100 to 150 years old. This week, I will read Part 2. And this story is about, I would say, close to 300 years old. You have to determine this for yourself as I go on in the reading of it. You will understand that a lot of the words are, for lack of a better word, made up by the author. He wasn't a very learned or learned person, but he was very intelligent. I hope that this magic story could be a gift for you and help you on your spiritual path. It might give you some good spiritual insights, might bring you closer to the divine, and maybe it might just change your life. So, without further ado, this is The Magic Story Part 2 by unknown author. Inasmuch as I have evolved from my experience the one great secret of success for all worldly undertakings, I deem it wise, now that the number of my days is nearly counted, to give to the generations that are to follow me the benefit of whatsoever knowledge I possess. I do not apologize for the manner of my expression, nor for the lack of literary merit, the latter being, I wot, in its own apology. Tools much heavier than the pen have been my portion, and moreover, the weight of years has somewhat palsied the hand and brain. Nevertheless, the fact I can tell, and what I deem the meat within the nut, what mattereth it, in what manner the shell be broken, so that the meat be obtained and rendered useful? I doubt not that I shall use in the telling expressions that have clung to my memory since childhood. For when men attain the number of my years, happenings of youth are likely to be clearer to their perceptions than are events of recent date, nor doth it matter how a thought is expressed, if it be wholesome and helpful, and findeth the understanding. Much have I wearied my brain anent the question, how best to describe this recipe for success that I have discovered, and it seemeth advisable to give it as it came to me. That is, if I relate somewhat of the story of my life, the directions for agglomerating the substances and supplying the seasoning for the accomplishment of the dish will plainly be perceived. Happen they may, and that men may be born generations after I am dust, who will live to bless me for the words I write. My father, then, he was a seafaring man who early in life forsook his vocation and settled on a plantation in the colony of Virginia, where, some years thereafter, I was born, which event took place in the year 1642. And that was over 100 years ago. Better for my father had it been had he hearkened to the wise advice of my mother that he remained in the calling of his education. But he would not have it so, and the good vessel he captained was bartered for the land I spoke of. Here beginneth the first lesson to be acquired. Man should not be blinded to whatsoever merit exists in the opportunity which he hath in hand, remembering that 1,000 promises for the future should weigh as naught against the possession of a single piece of silver. When I had achieved 10 years, my mother's soul took flight, and 2 years thereafter my worthy father followed her. I, being their only begotten, was left alone. Howbeit there were friends who for a time cared for me. That is to say, they offered me a home beneath their roof, a thing which I took advantage of for the space of 5 months. From my father's estate there came to me naught, but in the wisdom that came with increasing years, I convinced myself that his friend under whose roof I lingered for some time had defrauded him, and therefore me. Of the time from the age of 12 and a half until I was 23, I will make no recital here, since that time hath not to do with this tale. But some time after, having in my possession the sum of 16 guineas, 10 which I had saved from the fruits of my labor, I took ship to Boston town, where I began to work first as a cooper, and thereafter as a ship's carpenter, although always after the craft was docked, for the sea was not amongst my desires. Fortune will sometimes smile upon an intended victim because of pure perversity of temper. Such was one of my experiences. I prospered, and at 27 owned the yard wherein, less than 4 years earlier, I had worked for hire. Fortune, howbeit, is a jade who must be coerced. She will not be coddled. Here beginneth the second lesson to be acquired. Fortune is ever elusive and can only be retained by force. Deal with her tenderly, and she will forsake you for a stronger man. In that, methinks, she is not unlike other women of my knowledge. About this time, disaster, which is one of the heralds of broken spirits and lost resolve, paid me a visit. Fire ravaged my yards, leaving me nothing in its blackened paths but debts, which I had not the coin wherewith to defray. I labored with my acquaintances, seeking assistance for a new start, but the fire that had burned my competence seemed also to have consumed their sympathies. So it happened within a short time that not only had I lost it all, but I was hopelessly indebted to others, and for that they cast me into prison. It is possible that I might have rallied from my losses, but for this last indignity, which broke down my spirits, so that I became utterly despondent. Upward of a year I was detained within the gaol, and when I did come forth, it was not the same hopeful, happy man, content with his lot, and with confidence in the world and its people who had entered there. Life has many pathways, and of them by far the greatest number lead downward. Some are precipitous, others are less abrupt, but ultimately, no matter at what inclination the angle may be fixed, they arrive at the same destination, failure. And here beginneth the third lesson. Failure exists only in the grave. Man, being alive, hath not yet failed. Always he may turn about and ascend by the same path he descended by, and there may be one that is less abrupt, albeit longer of achievement, and more adaptable to his condition. When I came forth from prison, I was penniless. In all the world I possessed naught beyond the poor garments which covered me, and a walking stick which the turnkey had permitted me to retain, since it was worthless. Being a skilled workman, howbeit, I speedily found employment at good wages, But having eaten the fruit of worldly advantage, dissatisfaction possessed me. I became morose and sullen, whereat, to cheer my spirits and for the sake of forgetting the losses I had sustained, I passed my evenings at the tavern. Not that I drank over much of liquor except on occasion, for I have ever been somewhat abstemious, but that I could laugh and sing and parry-wit and bandages with my ne'er-do-well companions. And here might be included the fourth lesson. Seek comrades among the industrious, for those who are idle will sap your energies from you. It was my pleasure at that time to relate upon slight provocation the tale of my disasters, and to rail against the men whom I deemed to have wronged me, because they had not seen fit to come to my aid. Moreover, I found childish delight in filching from my employer each day a few moments of the time for which he paid me. Such a thing is less honest than downright theft. This habit continued and grew upon me until the day dawned which found me not only without employment, but also without character, which meant that I could not find hope to find work with any other employer in Boston town. It was then that I regarded myself as a failure. I can liken my condition at that time for naught more similar than that of a man who, descending the steep side of a mountain, loses his foothold. The farther he slides, the faster he goes. I have also heard this condition described by the word Ishmaelite, which I understand to be a man whose hand is against everybody, and who thinks that the hands of every other man are against him. And here beginneth the fifth lesson. The Ishmaelite and the leper are the same, since both are abominations in the sight of man, albeit they differ much, in that the former may be restored to perfect health. The former is entirely the result of imagination. The latter has poison in his blood. I will not discourse at length upon the gradual degeneration of my energies. It is not meet ever to dwell much upon misfortunes, which saying is also worthy of remembrance. It is enough if I add that the day came where I possessed not wherewith to purchase food and raiment, and I found myself like unto a pauper, save at infrequent times when I could earn a few pence or mayhap a shilling. Steady employment I could not secure, so I became emaciated in body, and not but skeleton in spirit. My condition then was deplorable, not so much for the body be it said, but as for the mental part of me, which was sick unto death. In my imagination I deemed myself ostracized by the whole world, for I had sunk very low indeed, and here beginneth the sixth and final lesson to be acquired, which cannot be told in one sentence nor in one paragraph, but must needs be adopted from the remainder of this tale. Well, do I remember my awakening? Well, do I remember my awakening? For it came in the night when, in truth, I did awake from sleep. My bed was a pile of shavings in the rear of the cooper's shop where once I had worked for hire. My roof was the pyramid of casks, underneath which I had established myself. The night was cold, and I was chilled, albeit paradoxically. I had been dreaming of light and warmth, and the depletion of good things. You will say when I relate the effect the vision had on me, that my mind was affected. So be it, for it is the hope that the minds of others might be likewise influenced, which disposes me to undertake the labor of this writing. It was the dream which converted me to the belief, nay, the knowledge that I was possessed of two entities. And it was my own better self that afforded me the assistance for which I had pleaded in vain from my acquaintances. I have heard this condition described by the word double. Nevertheless, that word does not comprehend my meaning. A double can be not more than a double, neither half being possessed of individuality. But I will not philosophize, since philosophy is not but a suit of garments for the decoration of a dummy figure. Moreover, it was not the dream itself which affected me. It was the impression made by it, and the influence that it exerted over me, which accomplished my enfranchisement. In a word, then, I encouraged my other identity. After toiling through a tempest of snow and wind, I peered into a window and saw that other being. He was rosy with health. Before him on the hearth blazed a fire of logs. There was a conscious power and force in his demeanor. He was physically and mentally muscular. I rapped timidly upon the door, and he bade me enter. There was not a unkindly smile of derision in his eyes as he motioned me to a chair by the fire, but he uttered no word of welcome. And when I had warmed myself, I went forth again into the tempest, burdened with the shame which the contrast between us had forced upon me. It was then that I awoke, and here cometh the strange part of my tale. For when I did awake, I was not alone. There was a presence with me, intangible to others, I discovered later, but real to me. The presence was in my likeness, yet it was strikingly unlike. The brow not more lofty than my own, yet seemed more round and full. The eyes, clear, direct, and filled with purpose, glowed with enthusiasm and resolution. The lips, chin, the whole contour of face and figure was dominant and determined. He was calm, steadfast, and self-reliant. I was cowering, filled with nervous trembling, and fearsome of intangible shadows. When the presence turned away, I followed, and throughout the day I never lost sight of it, save when it disappeared for a time beyond the doorway where I dared not enter. At such places I awaited its return with trepidation and awe, for I could not help wondering at the temerity of the presence, so like myself, yet so unlike, in daring to enter where my own feet feared to tread. It seemed also as if purposely I was led to the place and to the men where and before whom I most dreaded to appear, to offices where once I had transacted business, to men with whom I had financial dealings. Throughout the day I pursued the presence, and at evening saw it disappear beyond the portals of a hostelry, famous for its cheer and good living. I sought the pyramid of casks and shavings. Not again in my dreams that night did I encounter the better self, for that is what I have named it, albeit when perchance I awakened from slumber, it was near to me, ever wearing that calm smile of kindly derision, which could not be mistaken for pity, nor for condolence in any form. The contempt of it stung me sorely. The second day was not unlike the first, being a repetition of its forerunner, and I was again doomed to wait outside during the visits which the presence paid to places where I fain would have gone had I possessed the requisite courage. It is fear which deporteth a man's soul from his body, and rendereth it a thing to be despised. Many a time I essayed to address it, but enunciation rattled in my throat, unintelligible, and the day closed like its predecessor. This happened many days, one following another, until I ceased to count them, albeit I discovered that constant association with the presence was producing an effect on me. And one night, when I awoke among the casks and discerned that he was present, I made bold to speak, albeit with marked timidity. "Who are you?" I ventured to ask. And I was startled into an upright posture by the sound of my own voice, and the question seemed to give pleasure to my companion, so that I fancied there was less of derision in his smile when he responded. "I am that I am," was the reply. "I am he who you have been. I am he who you may be again. Wherefore do you hesitate? I am he who you were, and whom you have cast out for other company. I am the man made in the image of God, who once possessed your body. Once we dwelt within it together, not in harmony, for that can never be, nor yet in unity, for that is impossible, but as tenants in common, who rarely fought for full possession. Then you were a puny thing, but you became selfish and exacting, until I could no longer abide with you. Therefore I stepped out. There is a plus entity and minus entity in every human body that is born into this world. Whichever one of these is favored by the flesh becomes dominant. Then is the other inclined to abandon its habitation, temporarily or for all time. I am the plus entity of yourself. You are the minus entity. I own all things. You possess not. That body which we both inhabited is mine, but it is unclean, and I will not dwell within it. Cleanse it, and I will take possession. Why do you pursue me? I next asked of the presence. You have pursued me, not I you. You can exist without me for a time, but your path leads downward, and the end is death. Now that you approach the end, you debate if it not be politic that you should cleanse your house and invite me to enter. Step aside from the brain and the will. Well, that is the first half of the second part of the magic story. I hope so far you're enjoying the story and you're able to follow along, even though the language is very old. The author was born in 1642, and I can't even imagine what Stuyrtevant had gone through when he discovered this manuscript and how it just changed him. And now at this point in the story, this unknown author had gone through a really bad childhood, and he ended up homeless because his parents died, and then he became a shipbuilder, and he went to Boston, and he ended up working his way up through the ranks, and he gets this beautiful shipyard. It's all his, and he's the boss, and he's in charge, and his life is going so well. And then when everything burns down, I'm assuming this is before insurance, he loses everything. And this poor guy, I mean, he just sinks back down lower than before and thinks that everything is doomed to failure. It's just one of the saddest stories. And you know, it's so common to all of us, isn't it? You know, we have such wonderful times in our lives, and then something happens, one incident will happen, and we just sink so low. And we have to bring ourselves back. Sometimes we're the ones in charge of digging that hole that we're going down into. And sometimes we've got to build it back up and climb out ourselves. Sometimes we're thrown off of a cliff and we have to figure out a way to get back up on our own. But this story it's real. It's actually true. I can't even imagine what Stuyrtevant went through when he first found this manuscript for 3 pennies in an antique store. How amazing is that? That this man came in from the cold and all he has in his pocket is 3 pennies. And he's looking around the antique store, acting like a customer, just trying to get warm. And he sees this manuscript, and something in his soul cries out for it. And he picks it up, and this is what it is. It's like, wow, he was at his lowest when he found this manuscript. And reading the manuscript, it's just everybody. It's like such a common theme throughout history. You know, maybe some people, some of you listening to this show, maybe you're at your lowest point, so you've stumbled upon my show. Or a friend told you, hey, listen to Metaphysical Soul Speak, and so you did. And you're hearing this show for a reason. You know, I think that there are no coincidences in this world. And I think that this show can, I'm hoping the show can transform your life. I know that the story has transformed mine, and I know that it can help you too. And if you want to hear it again, it will re-air later today. It will also re-air next week on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. And within a week, it should be in the archives. I'll have it up for about a month. In fact, I'll probably keep this one up a little longer on the archives because I want to keep part 1, part 2, and part 3 together on the archives so that you can hear it again and again and again, because this story is really something special. And I hope that you've really enjoyed it. But yeah, next week it's an amazing conclusion, so I hope you'll tune in. And thank you so much for listening to this today.
Oh, well, I hope you enjoyed tonight's throwback episode. That was the second part of the 3-parter series I did originally 6 years ago of the magic story. So, yeah, again, just disregard what I said about it being aired twice this week on Sunday and Wednesday and blah, 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 because again, that was when it was a radio show. This is Metaphysical Soul Speak, the podcast. So even though it's technically the same show, it's slightly different format and it's presented to the public in a different way. And honestly, I'm so grateful that I'm able to have a podcast because you can listen to any of my shows anytime. You don't have to go to my website and pay to have a download. I'm still in the middle of revamping that website. When it's up and running and done, then I will let you guys know. my podcast is always going to be free forever to listen to. You can listen to it as many times as you like. It's going to be a lot different. Everything's going to be way different than what it says on soulspeakradio.com, which is my original website. If you want to go back and see the original website, you can. It's probably in the next 48 hours. I'm going to start working on it heavily. I'm no longer a part of AWAP Talk 24/7 to be a part of it. And it was just too much. It was too much for me just to be on the air for 2 hours without they didn't have archives. They didn't keep any of my old shows. All of my old shows originally were on my website, but then they changed the format of the player, and I am unable to retrieve the greater majority of my shows now. So what I've been able to retrieve in the past few months, I will be playing for you as the Throwback Thursday continues, and it won't continue for too much longer, maybe another month, possibly 2 months if I can figure it out. But then what I'll do when I'm done with all the episodes, I'm going to add back in the 5 minutes of therapy for your spiritual success, which is part of the original show. And I'll just add one of those every Thursday until I run out. So I don't know, just kind of keeping the flames and memory alive of the old show as we move forward with the current one, which I think is much better overall. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you that I appreciate you guys listening, and I wanted to thank you for your continued support. I have discovered that there is a new form of statistics on my main page, which is super cool. And I found out that 54% of my listening audience in the United States is from California. So yay, California, you're winning. I don't know what that means, but you're winning. 60% of my show is heard of my listeners are from the United States, and 10% are from France. Remember when I told you guys, I have a feeling that my twin flame is listening, and I have a feeling he's connected to France. I thought that was pretty interesting because after France, all the other countries are 5% or less of listening audience. So it looks like I might have, maybe 2 people in Ireland and 2 people in Australia and, just a couple of people here and there throughout all of Europe. But 10% of my listening audience is from France. So, bonjour. And merci beaucoup. I'm very happy about that. Anyway, tell your friends about the show. I need more listeners. We need to spread the positivity and the light that is Metaphysical Soul Speak. But I will be back tomorrow with a brand new show. Right now, I am signing off with peace and joy and the high vibes of the holy 5th dimension. Until next time. Metaphysical Soul Speak is run on sponsors and listener support. This means listeners like you. If you are so inclined to support my efforts and my little podcast, please visit me at anchor.fm/metaphysical and pledge an amount of your choosing today. Thank you.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.